Okay, this is going to be a little more organized presentation. I'm going to go basically from front to back on all the structures you need to know, and then turn it around and do it that way. Okay, so let's start right in the front with the internal nares, which would be this part right here where the nasal cavity is. Okay, below that you have your premaxilla, which holds the incisors, and above that you have the nasal bone, which goes up. Okay, there's a frontal part of the maxilla which goes up towards the frontal bone, towards the forehead. Okay, and then this is your maxilla. And there's a few parts of your maxilla you need to know. The orbital process of the maxilla is this part that creates part of the orbit. Okay, the alveolar margin of the maxilla is the tooth socket, or where the teeth fit in. Okay, and then the zygomatic process of the maxilla is this little part that goes up towards the zygomatic arch. Oh, and one other process would then be the palatine process of the maxilla. And then you also have a palatine process of the premaxilla, and the hole in between those two is called the incisive foramen. Okay? One other structure, this hole right under the zygomatic arch, is called the infraorbital foramen. Okay? So then we have the frontal bone, which I mentioned before, which is the forehead. And the lacrimal bone is this little bone in the front of the orbit. It has a little hole there. Be where your tear duct goes. That's the Nasolacrimal Canal. Okay, and so then this area where the eye socket goes is the orbit, which is created by the zygomatic arch and the postorbital processes. Okay? So that's the frontal bone, postorbital processes. There's another hole. It's not a complete separation between the orbit, but behind that, which is called the Temporal Fnestra. And let's see. And then the Temporal Fossa is this area right here where you have muscles running through here. Okay? The zygomatic arch is made up of two bones. The first one is the jugal. Okay? And then the second one is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. The temporal bone has a few processes we'll go over. So then this is the temporal bone right here. And then this part of it's called the squamosal portion of the temporal bone. And it there's a suture here in between the parietal and temporal bones. This is the parietal. Then you have a little bone in between the parietals towards the back called the interparietal. So the parietal meets the occipital bone, which is the posterior end here. Where they come together, it makes this little ridge called the nuchal crest, or the Nuchal Line. And you can see it's kind of a sharp angular ridge there. Okay, so then the occipital bone is on the back. You have this large hole where the spinal cord comes out of. That's called the Foramen Magnum. And you have two occipital condyles, one on either side. And these are smooth articular surfaces which rub with the atlas, the first vertebrae. Okay? So then let's go underneath. We already went through the palatine processes and the incisive foramen, but there are also two other holes, okay, right next to each other, and the one anterior, or towards the nose, is the Sphenopalatine Foramen, and the one posterior is the posterior palatine foramen. So, and they're hard to differentiate between the two if you can only see one of them, but if you can see both of them, you just know the one towards the back is the posterior palatine foramen. We have a few bones right here in the middle. The Basisphenoid, the Presphenoid, and the Vomer, which kind of goes into the nasal cavity there. And you have the pterygoid process, and on the end of the pterygoid process you have a little wing-like structure called the hamulus. Okay? So we're going to go back right side up so I can show you one bone right here, which is called the Sphenoid. And this is the temporal bone right here, and it's just a little triangular piece right there. Okay? Then we have a bunch of holes. The first one here is the optic foramen, and then you have the orbital fissure, the Foramen Rotundum, and the Foramen Ovale. And there's another hole right here underneath the tympanic bulla, and that's called the Eustachian Canal. And then this is the ear hole. That's the external acoustic meatus, or okay. There's another little hole right behind it called the Stylomastoid Foramen, and two processes which are kind of separated by a little dip in between the two on the back of the tympanic bulla. The first one is the Mastoid process, and then the second one is the Jugular process. Okay, and I think that is all the structures you need to know. There you go. One other one are the Turbinate bones, which are right here inside the nasal cavity. You can also see them a little bit if you look right in the front. See the turbinate bones. Also forgot the Mandibular Fossa, which is right there.